So good afternoon, Roger Crisp. It's absolutely delightful to have you on Business Voices, looking at careers and what your teacher might have said about you when you were at school, and we'll relate all that back at the end. So Roger Crisp, broadcast media and relations specialist, spent a number of years with the BBC World Service, knows lots of really exciting and interesting people that that I know from the TV as well, and quite interesting actually. We were talking recently about how people can actually be on TV and radio, but they think this thing actually only happens when there's going to be a crisis. And in actual fact, that's not always the case, is it? And over the sort of the next 20 minutes or so, we'll be finding out a little bit about that. So I know that you do quite a lot of work with some large corporates like Kia, people like that. I'm very interested to find out more about what we can learn from you, Roger. I'm going to bat it all back over to you now and say, hello, Roger Crisp. Tell us all about TV and radio interviews. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Beverley.
Okay.
What a wonderful introduction. I don't know if I'm the right person to be here. Yes, that first point you were saying about interviews on radio and TV and with the broadcast press, there is a tendency for firms to think, well, it's all to do with when you're in a crisis, and a crisis won't happen to us. But I try and encourage particularly smaller and medium-sized companies to think instead that being on a TV interview or a radio interview, local radio, local TV even, is actually a very positive place to go, because you have the chance, if they know you're out there and that you are willing and enjoy talking to them, they can come to you as an expert in something to do with your company, with your company's industry sector, with maybe something the government has brought out that affects businesses and things, and they want an expert opinion from somebody such as yourself. Then you have the chance to be invited on to, let's say, local radio, perhaps 30, 40, 50,000 people listening, and you're talking to that number of people for nothing.
So it's rather like your marketing plan, isn't it, where you're targeting a particular client. I suppose you can build that into your media relation or your media discussion as well. Very interesting with that. And does that work the same on national and local TV the same?
Clearly, the further up the broadcast chain you go, the harder it will become to be known as the expert. But it's like anything else. The more often you do it and try and do it, the more likely it is that a broadcast company or somebody will come to you. And if you can go on local stuff, first of all, you learn a huge amount about the environment of broadcasting and what works and what doesn't. But the great thing about going into offering yourself as an expert to broadcasters is that the pressure is off. You're not having to deal with the crisis. You're not having to defend something that maybe you did or your company did. Instead, you're going there because they want you to be there.
Yeah.
They want you to be able to talk about something. And they can't do that if they don't know you're out there. So it's important to have a go. You can learn a lot from the straightforward media training that people like me offer. But then you need to market yourself to the broadcast media, to the
and are they very open about that, Roger, or do they like that to come through a PR company, or can you do it yourself?
I would do it personally, especially at local level. And if you can build up a bit of a track record and you will obviously keep recordings, etc., then you've got something. Somebody will probably hear you, and from further up the broadcasting food chain, and that's a chance that they'll come and find you. You could, with the right copyright in place, perhaps you could also put those up on your own YouTube channel as a bit like a CV side of it. So the key point really is then, don't be afraid of doing TV and radio interviews. Learn about them. They're they could be a great marketing tool for you, and should further down the line some kind of crisis actually happen, you're already in good stead, because A, you understand the broadcast environment, you know how they work, and B, you may well be dealing with the people you've already met, and that will be a great help, because they're already half beyond your side as well. So I would encourage people to take it seriously, to have a go, and you'll learn. The great thing is these are transferable skills. What you learn in a in dealing with a broadcast interview are skills that you can also apply to your business meetings, to your business conferences, to your maybe presentations in a conference, how to deal with the question and answer session effectively. So these skills go beyond just, will I be on TV or will I be on radio? There's a broader...
we just thinking, actually, we met recently on the Vicenza IT services company webinar, didn't we? And we were all talking there about working from home and how people behave online, and we were discussing all of those things. And I guess, you know, in this digital age that we're just about to move into, certainly with a lot of companies sort of saying to me that, you know, they're actually thinking about taking their employees working at home more, it's going to be really important that we present ourselves to the media or to each other or on webinars or whatever it is. It's a perfect opportunity, isn't it, to get our message out there. And as you very rightly said, you can put that on your website or on a YouTube channel, and it's great media. Back over to you, Roger, because I know that you're just about to say something interesting.
Well, I was going to say the skills that you get from dealing with TV and radio interviews at the real places are exactly what helps you with the situation that we're dealing with at the moment, and what you and I are doing now, a Zoom call, a Zoom chat, a Zoom interview. It makes you aware of what works and what doesn't work on screen. So, I mean, for example, it's very simple things when it comes to the on-screen stuff that count. The main thing is we're all, as people, very used to seeing high-quality TV, high-quality cinema screens. And when we come to our Zoom screens, they come a little bit home movie sort of thing, don't they? But
Yes.
Principles apply that are very easy to deal with. And it's when these simple principles go wrong that they're noticeable. So, for example, if I'm now not using a headset, so my laptop is my broadcast, and microphone is in there. Now, if I don't sit in a position, if I start to relax a bit too much, which again you wouldn't want to do on TV, and I move away and back into my chair, I'm going away from my microphone.
Disappearing.
And it's terrible, And equally, if I don't get the lighting right, if I turn this off, I'm now almost like the dark side of the moon, aren't I? You can't relate to my eye movements or my facial expressions.
Yeah, that's right. And that's becoming more and more difficult as well, isn't it? Online with people have been talking about, you know, non-verbal cues and body language, and how you haven't got all that, you know, when you've got your sort of face to screen. So really interesting stuff, actually.
I mean, as I was telling you, I was just yesterday giving a Zoom webinar to a school across the country, miles away, which is the benefit of this. I didn't have to drive 4 hours to get there. But I was talking about preparation for interviews, for job interviews, for academic interviews. And within that context, I was talking about, such as we're doing now, Skype interviews, video interviews. I mean, I remember well before the internet came along, I'm that old, that doing a video camera interview for a company in Saudi Arabia. And that was really weird, because there wasn't a screen for me to look at. I had no idea what I looked like or what they were doing and what they looked like at all.
So I suppose for schools and colleges and universities and, you know, all the whole educational establishment really are really going to benefit from some of this skill set from yourself, Roger, because, you know, moving forward, we're not going to be able to all go sort of open days or, you know, sort of face-to-face interviews. So it's going to be really, really important that education get this right as well as business. So very, very valid point there.
And many schools and universities, many educational establishments in general, which are currently closed, as it were, physically closed, have now become online universities, online schools. And there's been a huge learning curve. And equally companies as well. And what I'm saying to companies and anybody who's doing this now is, even if your company or your school or whatever goes back to what might be the more normal way of things afterwards, and some will have to, just by the nature of their work or what they do, I think it's really important not to lose these Zoom skills amongst your colleagues and staff, etc. So I would say, even if you go back to a much more normal existence afterwards, do have a Zoom conference at least once a month, so that everybody is still able to do it without being fazed by it. And it could still be very important for if you're starting to do with internet.
Keep your skills sharp, isn't it? You know, just like anything else, if you don't practice it, you lose those skills. So absolutely fascinating stuff, really.
Yeah.
So tell us a little bit, I'm just quite keen to know a little bit more about your career. What led you up to what you're doing now, Roger? Because I know you've got this sort of illustrious career with the BBC, which you're going to tell us all about, and how that relates into what you're actually using now for training companies and obviously educational establishments. So tell us a bit about your career, Roger. How did you get into that?
Well, it's actually, as I said, I was around before there were mobile phones, never mind the internet and computers and stuff. And I kind of knew that when I left school, what I didn't really want was to have a career. What I didn't want to be doing was the same thing for the next 40 years and then retire. And so I think, looking back anyway, I was probably what is now called a portfolio type of person, because I always have 2 or 3 things going, and one of those things would be at the forefront for a particular amount of time, but the other 2 or 3 things were still chugging along in the background, and they all fed off each other. So that included such things as teaching, being an international tour guide, being running ski resort for an English ski company, going to the Middle East to teach and train business executives in English and giving presentations. And it was, funny enough, it was out in the Middle East, in Saudi Arabia, where I first did proper broadcasting, because they had English TV and radio services, and I got involved with that, and happened to come back to the UK just at the time when the World Service was expanding its need for presenters and broadcasters, and I just sent a tape in, and there I was doing it for the next 8 years or so. And but at the same time, I still kept some other things going. So I was still going to schools and giving interview training. I was still writing about travel and still writing about culture for magazines. And so, and I even did one international bit of tour guiding while I was at the World Service, which was a bit of fun. I went to a company I used to work for before at that time was Kuoni, and I then took a tour to India, which was great. So again, it was
fascinating.
It was, and the thing was that all these things feed off each other, because the common theme, I think, for me through all of those ideas was communicating to people, interacting with people, and to some extent teaching and training. And so, having left the World Service some time ago now, I have been going to companies here and abroad, doing this media training, presentation training as well. So in other words, if you're giving a presentation to a conference that's about, I don't know, oil and gas, for example, is one area I was. I don't need to be an expert in oil and gas, but I did a lot of work with them. But I do know whether the presentation is making sense. And it's those kind of things, and it's the live feedback. Going back to what we were talking about right at the beginning, the different sized companies involved in what I do. The big difference between the major multinational companies and the smaller companies is smaller companies think that they're under the radar and won't need to be involved with the media, with the broadcast media. Large companies, multinationals, for example, regularly have media training and crisis management training. They'll have a whole day of it for the people, the executives, people who are going to be the ones to face the media. And a key thing that comes out of that is, if it's the first time a lot of people have done it, the media training, there's a tendency to think, well, the more senior the person, the better they're going to be in front of a camera. What you soon find out, actually, when you start some media training, is who in your company you really do and don't want to allow out in front of a camera and the microphone. Because it's about knowing what you're doing, but having an instinct for it as well. And also being
thrust in front of cameras, like some of the health and medical teams have been, just recently, certainly on government media in the afternoon on the TV that we've had. Excuse me. And some of those people are just, researchers and scientists and medical people. They're not people that you would normally see on TV. And I felt really sorry for one or two of them being sort of thrust into that situation. And like you and I, who have spent a lot of time talking to other people in our careers, sort of look at them and go, oh my goodness, that must be such a challenge for that poor guy to actually get that. But they've got there, so they're all doing really well. Do you do much with the government, Roger?
I don't with the government. No, I've done a lot of work with particular industry sectors. A lot of work with gas, for example, based out of Switzerland, in Germany, with a German basis of a bit of a McKinsey type of company, Hill Knowlton, who are worldwide, and they deal in different areas of the world. And I've done a lot of work with them over the years, with oil and gas, with Kia Motors, with DHL, that kind of thing. And over here, with interesting things such as the UK Transport Laboratory, where they're testing all kinds of things to do with driving and vehicles and what have you. The Finnish Tourist Board in this country. So it's a whole range of things, and my expertise doesn't have to be in the industry sector. My expertise is in how you come across and put your stuff across to your industry sector, or to people who are not from it but need to know it.
And great for connecting as well, I would have thought, if you know people in that environment, to be able to connect people together to help each other, I would imagine too, in those sectors. I know you've been quite involved with the motor industry as well. Anything to do with motor racing? Anything in that environment?
No, not motor racing. No, it was more to do with this was particularly with Kia Motors in Frankfurt, their European office, and we were. And I had four executives, and we went the whole day with them. And the great thing, what was fascinating to me about these people, and equally with DHL in Zurich, with their European and African services, Middle East, was that these people, I mean, they've got real jobs. Their job isn't to be on TV and radio, and equally in these multinationals, English is not their first language necessarily. I was dealing with people who were maybe using English as their second or third language, but it was as if they, imagine you suddenly on the BBC, you've got to be able to put it across, and so it was fascinating. These people had such skills and such an ability to communicate. And luckily for us, of course, English is the general business language around the world. So we have the benefit of at least it's our language we're using.
Good job in my case, because I was never very good at languages at school.
Well, it's very hard. It's very hard. How many languages are there in the world?
Oh my goodness.
Major countries, 192 or 193, aren't there? And
so what other countries have you been to, Roger? Have you sort of spent a lot of time traveling as well? Were you saying with your writing for research and travel?
These were for publications, travel magazines, culture magazines, and of course my travel guiding. I've always been a bit of a nomad, really. I think that's what my teachers would recognise in me, thinking about the school connection. That I was always. They would have said that I enjoyed school, which I did. I really had a great time at school, whatever level of school it was, and university, and I enjoyed people. I enjoyed getting on with people and going to places. So, for example, when I was doing my teaching job for 5 years, as soon as the last bell went at the last day of term, I was off on a plane or a train or whatever to go and see where I could get to next. So, and in terms of working abroad, some of the most fascinating places I've been to would be China in the late 80s, for example, taking people around China, out of Hong Kong. And when we see what's going on today with the whole China thing, it's quite fascinating. And I can remember how weird that was to people I know at home. I remember coming back one time from having spent a month out in China, all over China, Hong Kong, ended up in Bali as well. And I went into my local pub, and one of my old friends was there from the pub. It was lunchtime, so we were having a quick pint, and he said, "Oh, hello, Roger. Where have you come back from this time then?" I said, "Well, I've just come back from China, actually, all over China." And there was a bit of silence. And then he said, "Oh, I see. Did you see who won the local football last week, by the way?" So it was completely.
Completely.
And in those days, of course, China was a strange place to be going to, because the Berlin Wall hadn't come down. It was very much east and west, and Europe was east. So it's been fascinating to To do that. I've hitchhiked across Canada after university. I hitchhiked and lived in France over the years. I've been all over the States driving a car on various occasions with a wine expert, which was fantastic.
Oh wow, but that was good fun.
We were going on TV and radio. We were going on TV and radio to demystify the subject of wine to the American market, and we went. I think there's probably.
Imagine if you'd had social media, you know, to the extent that we've got it now in that point. I mean, I follow somebody on Instagram at the moment. He's been traveling all the countries in the world. It's been absolutely fascinating, you know, and he's been trying to do it on a budget. Just amazing. But imagine if you'd have had the experience or the media that we've got now, you know, back along, how great that would have been as a, you know, as a bit of film of your life, really.
Well, my premise generally right from the start was, if I can get someone to pay me to go somewhere, great, I'm off, I'll go, and I'll see what happens when we get there, you know. Yeah,
well, maybe from this, Roger, lots of people will offer you the opportunity to go and do that. So if you are sort of talking to younger people and or people that might want to get into the communications industry, I would imagine it's a lot tougher and a bit more competitive these days than it used to be, although obviously everything's a little bit quiet at the moment. How would you suggest people actually try and get themselves as a career into broadcasting and media?
I think that the interesting thing is there's no direct route into broadcasting in particular. And in terms of being the presenter side as opposed to on the technical side of broadcasting, the worst way to do that would be something called media studies, because no one who you see as a presenter or broadcaster has done media studies. They're always somebody who's done something else. Maybe their history, maybe their law, maybe they're like me, they've had a gamut of things across culture and travel and those kind of things. And then you become of interest because you have some expertise.
Topical discussion.
Topical, yeah, exactly. The key way otherwise, though, if it's specifically, let's say, news and that area that you're interested in, then you've got to go through a journalism degree.
Yes.
And within that journalism course, you will be dealing with TV and broadcast radio as well. I mean, I had a fascinating time recently. A couple of months ago, I was able to go around Bournemouth University, who have got a very high reputation
for they have,
all that kind of thing, journalism, broadcast, media studies, etc. And they're very hot on the technical side. They've got very good technical courses. And I was able to see all their brand new recording suites and TV suites and all that kind of thing. And they have a course, for example, that would be an ideal basis for then putting yourself out there as whichever area of broadcasting you want to be in, be it in front of the cameras and microphones, or be it doing all the wizardry that I don't understand with all the buttons.
I have actually been down to Bournemouth and had a look at their sort of arts centre down there as well with one of my daughters. But it's absolutely fascinating, isn't it? And you just look at it, and you go, oh my goodness, where would you even start? And they've got a great reputation for pulling all that together actually, and use their own creative students to help with their production of their own work. So moving back to you anyway, Roger, with your career. So what would you say was the most exciting place that you've been to? I know you said China was a lot, time of interest. Where would you say has been quite challenging as well, I suppose, with culture?
It's different times in different places, really. I mean, for example, take this as an example. I said China, but what I didn't say was how I got to China in the first place. What I was first of all doing was taking a group of some 20 people from Liverpool Street Station by train to China.
My goodness.
We were going, so we'd go to Harwich, Hook of Holland. We'd then be on a train up through Northern Europe, up through Poland to Moscow, get on the Trans-Siberian train at Moscow. We'd go halfway across Siberia to Irkutsk. Then we'd change trains again and we'd come down through Outer Mongolia, through northern China. And in 3 weeks, we 2.5 weeks or so, we ended up in Hong Kong. So, I mean, again, it was fascinating to be able to do that. And of course it was, and I was the one in charge. I was the one leading the tour, and it was tricky.
Did you have to have lots of risk assessments, Roger, back in that particular time, or were you just able to go?
We didn't know how to spell that. because everything, this was real in the days of East and West and the Berlin Wall. I mean, the one thing you'd always never looked forward to doing was being on the train when you had to go through into East Germany, because they were the toughest and strictest of all of the border guards that we would meet on any whole journey. But the risk assessments were done in effect by the travel companies, because they were the ones offering the tours, and then they had to work with the international with the agencies in those countries. So they had to work with the Russian agencies, the Chinese agencies, the East German agencies, all for one journey. It was
but how things have actually changed a lot. I mean, I remember going from Prague through to Austria, and that was an ordeal in itself, you know, and that was still within Europe. And but it's fascinating, isn't it? So tell us a little bit more about your role with the BBC, and any interesting people you might have met as part of your career there, people that you are maybe still friends with.
Well, my main role in the World Service was newsreading and continuity. So partly in the newsroom, partly in the general running of the broadcast side of the radio itself, and of course it's all live. And I do remember it's interesting what happens when you're sitting in front of a microphone and you're reading a live news going out to, who knows, 150 million people or something. And the door would open behind you, and you know that that's someone coming in from the newsroom with a brand new story that you have no idea what it's going to be about.
Yeah, exciting.
Where in the world it's come from, what names are going to be in it, pronunciation, and you're holding up a piece of newspaper when you hear them come in. So you're holding it up and you're talking to the microphone, still delivering the piece that you're holding up, when they slip this piece of paper onto the top of the pile. So you're reading what you're reading, and you're trying to get a quick glance at the paper they've just put in there. And then it's time to do it. And you get onto the newspaper and you're trying to, this next paper, and you have to deliver it in the same manner. You're trying to scan two lines ahead at the same time to see what is coming up and where it's going. And one of the real problems are names of people, because, for example, Spanish and Portuguese names can be very similar to look at, but are pronounced very differently. And if you get great long names from say Bangladesh or Sri Lanka or places, you really have to be careful as to how you pronounce them, because if it's I mean, we would get phone calls from embassies saying so and so didn't say that name correctly, you know. And I remember one of my colleagues telling me that one of the funny or most difficult times she had was when a certain island, now very well known in Asia for holiday making, first hit the news, and it's spelt Phuket, which we now know is Phuket.
Phuket.
And she suddenly had this word in front of her, and she was struggling to say it, so she just said it as quickly as she could, and went on for the rest of the story, you know. And I just split a bit, you know.
That's absolutely fantastic, isn't it? Well, I mean, Roger, I absolutely, we've only got half an hour today, but I could listen and chat on to you for absolutely ages. So when you were at school, Roger, and your sort of teachers wrote you reports and you had to take those home to your parents, what was the sort of the underlying thing that they said about you as a child?
Well, I think the underlying thing was, as I kind of mentioned before, that I seemed to enjoy myself, and that I got on well with my friends around me at school, and that's still the case. I mean, for example, at the moment, from my old school here in Salisbury, I'm just organising my third ever reunion, and we're now all in our 60s, you know. And 50, 60 people to them over the years, and it's so much easier now to keep in touch with people, but in those days it was writing letters and it was receiving them.
That's right. Or you had to stand by the phone box and wait for the phone to ring. Actually, I seem to remember at some point. And then the other thing people say as well is, you haven't changed a bit.
Then you know they've either got rose tinted spectacles on or they're humouring you.
Well, I'm just going to have to say, Roger, it's been an absolutely delight to talk to you, and I hope that we can do this again at some stage. And I really look forward to hearing more about your lovely life stories.
Thank you very much, Beverley. I thoroughly enjoyed it.
You're very welcome, and it's been absolutely fantastic to have you on the show this afternoon. Thank you.
Thank you.